Good evening, everyone. Loosey-goosey, okay. My name is Josh Kramer. I'm the director of AJC New York. It's wonderful to see so many people. On behalf of AJC New York, we're pleased to see you all for our timely conversation with two leaders who have shown such support for the Jewish community, Representatives Mike Lawler and Ritchie Torres. AJC, the Global Advocacy Organization of the Jewish People, is a nonpartisan organization that works with leaders in the US and around the world to further the well-being of the Jewish people and to support Israel. Following the horrific terrorist attack on October 7th, AJC has worked with elected officials on the local, state, and federal levels to garner support for Israel. It is critical, I think we're about to change the slides, it is critical during this time when the loud majority of voices of those who stand against Israel make themselves heard with questionable, disruptive, and violent tactics, that we stand up and show our appreciation and support to the vast majority of elected officials that stand with Israel. Tonight, we're going to put that value into practice. Please direct your attention to the screen behind me. You can scan this QR code and enter your information to send a message to your member of Congress now in real time to urge support for Israel and condemning Hamas terror. I'm going to encourage people to take out their phones and snap a photo or use their QR readers to send a message now to your elected official. As the war continues, these messages of support are more important now than ever. We are proud to have so many allies in elected office here in New York City. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to thank our gracious hosts and partners at the 92nd Street Y, New York, for hosting us tonight. I would also like to give thanks to Access New York leader Liel Sinai for his leadership in putting together tonight's event. Before we go on with the proceedings tonight, yes, please. Before we go on, this is obviously end-of-year programming for us. It's December 21st. It's almost the new year. It's almost the holidays. It's the holiday break. And I want to take a moment to thank the AJC New York staff and sponsors that are so supportive of all that we do here in New York. The staff is actually backstage right now, but let's give a round of applause to the AJC staff. They're here, actually. I take it back. I also want to extend a thanks to our partners to the north, the AJC Westchester Fairfield office. I'm not sure if AJC Westchester Fairfield President Wendy Lupkin is here tonight, but I hope to have seen her. And our president, AJC New York, Rob Skolnick, is here. You'll hear from him a little bit later. It is now my pleasure to introduce our friend Aviv Ezra, Acting Consul General of Israel in New York. Born and raised in Israel, Aviv began his diplomatic career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1999, specializing in U.S.-Israel relations and American political affairs, while advancing Israel's security and promoting dialogue in the Middle East. Aviv holds a BA in Economics and Political Science from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he completed his MA in Government and Public Policy at Bar-Ilan University. In Aviv's career, he has served as Deputy Head of Israel's National Aid Agency at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Consul General of Israel at the Midwest, stationed in Chicago, Consul for Congressional Affairs at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., and Political Advisor to the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem. Consul General, we stand with you and the State of Israel. Thank you for being with us tonight, and I hand the podium over to you. Thanks again for being here.
Shalom, everybody. Good evening. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the State of Israel, on behalf of the people of Israel. And I want to thank you, Josh, for having us, and I thank you all for hosting this event. I think we are now in a junction in history where I think after October 7th, this is actually a junction of clarity, a moment of clarity for many of us. We believed, I would say, for many years after the disengagement from Gaza, that we'll be able to work with the governing forces in the Gaza Strip to look forward into progress, to look forward into the future. Unfortunately, that ended up October 7th, where all masks were torn off. We felt at this point that for us, it's pretty clear that what we were thinking was not what our enemies were thinking on the other side. And when I mean the enemies, I don't speak specifically about the Palestinians as a whole, but speaking specifically about Hamas. the magnitude of the events and the nature of the atrocities were mind-boggling for all of us in Israel. The nature of the atrocities, the killing of innocent civilians, deliberately going after the elderly, after women, raping of women, decapitating children, and later on, of course, the magnitude of the event itself that is almost in the equivalent sizes of almost 10 9/11s for us, shook us to the core. And of course, the fact that there was a focus on bringing and taking hostages, around 240 of them originally, into the Gaza Strip, created, I would say, an overwhelming, heartbreaking, and put Israel as a whole in a shock and a state of awe. But at the end of the day, for us, it's pretty clear that we will have to immediately push back against these efforts of these atrocities against Hamas. The campaign that we have in front of us in the Gaza Strip has two major goals. One, of course, is to make sure that these hostages come back home safely. And the second is to make sure, with a view to the future, that these kind of events will not repeat themselves again. And this is not about vengeance, not about revenge. It's about making sure that our civilians will be able to, maintain the contract between any country and its citizens to make sure that your child, your grandfather or your grandmother would not be extracted in the middle of the night in their PJ and then either assaulted or killed or being hostage in the Gaza Strip. I would say that the goals for Hamas were pretty clear. The first and foremost is, of course, to go after innocent civilians. And if you look at their charter, this is what they're talking about: eradicating Israel and killing Israelis and Jews. The second thing they wanted to go after is the Israeli spirit. They wanted to kill the Israeli spirit. This is the reason why they actually not only killed, but took footage of themselves in the process and later on broadcasted it. Serial killers don't usually do that. In this case, they wanted to go after the spirit of the state of Israel, the spirit of the people of Israel. And last but not least, they wanted to kill the peace process that has begun really to move forward. And as many of you are very well know, we already have peace process or peace accords with Egypt, with Jordan, with the Gulf countries, with Morocco, and many more ideas into the future, including with Saudi Arabia. I don't think, and I think this will be part of the conversation today, that I don't think that they have succeeded they obviously succeeded in the first goal, which was to kill Israelis, but they did not succeed in the second goal, which is to kill the spirit of Israelis, and I think this is a big miscalculation on their side. They also, I don't think, managed to kill the urge of ours to move forward in the peace accord. Maybe this is a detour, but we will continue our efforts to achieve an additional peace accords around the Middle East. And last but not least, they were thinking that Israel will stay alone in this fight, and it will be branded as a fight between Israel and Hamas. But the truth be told is that the free world has pushed back against Hamas and has made a clear message. Certainly here in America, you see a bipartisan support for Israel's right for self-defense, for Israel's duty for self-defense. You see it in a bipartisan manner, in a bicameral manner. You see it in a transcending administration kind of a message. You saw the president come to Israel a couple of days after the atrocities happened with a strong message of don't, and that don't was not geared to Hamas, it was geared to other forces, and we are all familiar with what's happening in the northern front of Israel with another radical proxy of Hezbollah, and what's happening in the Red Sea with the Houthis and the militias in Syria and Iraq, which brings us to the concept of zooming out and understanding that once again, this is not a fight between Israel and Hamas, but this is a fight between proxies of Iran, all of them surrounding Israel and representing values that none of us in the free world can even accept in the basic terms of force. So I think it's pretty clear, and I think part of the conversation today with my two friends, the members of Congress that will be in the fireside chat today, will be focused on how we cannot allow Iran to destabilize the region, to proliferate arms and terror. How do we make sure that we continue to support initiatives like the Abraham Accords in bringing more and more peaceful initiatives into the tent? And if it's possible, and I believe it is possible, we have to do it together in a united manner. I'm sure all of you are seeing the challenge, as I mentioned, in the Red Sea, where for the first time you have the EU, NATO, and the United States together in a coalition of 44 countries pushing back against that radical proxy of Iran, the Houthis. We have to send a strong message, a strong, united message from the free world to Iran that this is unacceptable, and they will have to be, in a sense, there will be ramifications for their activities. It could be diplomatic and others, but they have to understand that this will not be able to continue. I want to thank you for attending this evening. I want to thank you for keeping educating yourself about things that are happening. This is a complex situation, but I know and I'm sure that Israel will prevail. Israel is on the front line of the free world. And if Israel will find challenges in moving forward, I think it will be with many effects across the free world as a whole. So in all sense of trouble, we believe that we will make it out of it in a situation where we will show victory over the forces of evil. I want to thank you today for having us and look forward for that conversation. Thank you very, very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Squadron, Executive Vice President here at the 92nd Street Y. We're so happy to have all of you joining us in person and online for this very important conversation this evening. I'm going to get us started by introducing our three panelists, and then we'll have them come out. First, we have Representative Ritchie Torres, who's a fighter from the Bronx who has spent his entire life working for the community that he calls home. Like many people in the Bronx, poverty and struggle have never been abstractions to him, and he governs from a place of lived experience. In 2013, at the age of 25, Ritchie became New York City's youngest elected official and the first openly LGBTQ person elected to office in the Bronx. Congressman Mike Lawler proudly represents New York's 17th Congressional District, which includes Rockland County, Putnam County, and portions of Westchester and Dutchess counties. Prior to serving in the U.S. House, Congressman Lawler represented New York's 97th District in the State Assembly, where he passed more bills than any other member of his conference, a testament to his bipartisan, pragmatic approach to government. He has a long history of public service and is a lifelong Hudson Valley resident. And we have Dr. Mijal Bitton, who's a visiting researcher at NYU Wagner and the Rosh Kehillah, or communal leader, and co-founder of the Downtown Minyan in New York City. Dr. Bitton received a BA from Yeshiva University and earned her doctorate from NYU, where she conducted an ethnographic study of a Syrian Jewish community with a focus on developing the field of contemporary Sephardic studies in America. In 2018, Dr. Bitton was selected for inclusion in 36 Under 36 in New York Jewish Week. Will you please help me welcome Congressman Torres, Congressman Lawler, and Dr. Bitton to the 92NY stage.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm very excited for our conversation. Before I give you all of the most difficult questions, I want to start with real gratitude. Things have been really difficult for so many people in our community since October 7th, and both of you have shown as lights, fighting antisemitism, supporting Israel in its war against terror. And I would also say that when I told my friends about this event, when they heard about it, they said, what, a Republican, a Democrat talking to each other? It was amazing. So thank you so much for modeling for us what we can do in this country and with each other. And now, yeah, thank you. And if anyone were to look at your record, so many of the things that you fight for, whether it's affordable housing, the environment, education, you're progressive in that way. And in another way, we're seeing in terms of the way that American progressive, the trends of where they're going, we see very strong critiques in terms of your stances vis-a-vis Israel. So could you help us understand a little bit in terms of first principles, what is the reason that there's such a gap between you and those who are criticizing your stances? And I'm going to add a second question. What is the future of the Democratic Party in terms of the voices that are going to lead us forward?
What distinguishes me from, and obviously we have to be careful not to generalize, but I find that some of the most vociferous critics of Israel and American politics have actually never gone to Israel. Whatever your opinion on my views, I have formed my opinion on Israel, as a result of a decade of traveling to Israel and thinking about it and writing about it. And I tell people, before you rush to judgment, you should actually go to Israel and expose yourself to a variety of perspectives. Speak to both Israelis and Palestinians. Speak to both Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. Go to a place like State Road. See the bomb shelters that the bus stops that double as bomb shelters. And when you see the facts on the ground with your own eyes, I guarantee you that you will come to develop a view of Israel that is far more complicated than the caricature that percolates on Twitter and TikTok. And so I think that's the best form of education, is to actually travel to Israel. For most of my life, I had no reason to think about Israel. I grew up in a community that was almost exclusively Latino and African American. And so by the time I entered the New York City Council in 2014, I was a blank slate. And then I was invited by the Jewish Community Relations Council to go on a delegation to Israel. And when I announced that I was traveling to Israel, I became the target of overwhelming vitriol and hatred. People like the protesters here were accusing me of betraying my race and sexuality or aiding and abetting apartheid, the same criticisms that you hear today. And I remember going to a rally where the activists were holding a rally on the steps of City Hall, demonizing me. And I came across an activist that had a shirt that read, "Queers for Palestine." And I remember asking the activist, "I'm curious, what is your opinion of Hamas?" This is a conversation that happened in 2014. And I thought she was going to tell me I support Palestinian rights, but of course I condemn a terrorist organization like Hamas. Instead, she said, "I support Hamas because Hamas is fighting for the liberation of the Palestinian people. Hamas represents resistance to a quote-unquote occupying force." And so when I heard those words, I was in a state of shock. Like I had the beginnings of an epiphany. I said, the fact that an LGBTQ activist could defend a terrorist organization that systematically and savagely murders LGBTQ people, like that to me was as definitive a sign as any of the stupidity and absurdity and moral bankruptcy that BDS has increasingly inflicted on progressive politics. And I came to realize that one of the most influential ideas on college campuses, on social media platforms, was the idea of intersectionality, and there's a anti-Semitic version which holds that you cannot be both progressive and pro-Israel. So I would go to a criminal justice reform rally and someone would say, "From Ferguson to Palestine." Or I would go to an immigration reform rally and someone would say, "From Mexico to Palestine." And I would wonder to myself, what does Mexico and Ferguson have to do with Israel? And then it became obvious to me that the purpose of the BDS movement is to make everything about Israel, is to transform every progressive cause into a delegitimation campaign against Israel. If you think of anti-Semitism as a virus, this weaponized form of intersectionality has become the vector that carries that virus across a wide range of progressive movements. And so I saw clearly what was unfolding in progressive circles, and I said to myself, I could offer an alternative. I can tell the world, I'm black, I'm Latino, I'm gay, I'm a millennial, I'm progressive and pro-Israel, and I'm pro-Israel not despite my progressive values, but because of those progressive values.
And
And then to your question about the future, I think we're fighting for the soul of the Democratic Party, but if Democrats like me stand up, we will win because the truth is on our side. And Mike and I have both been critics of an organization known as the Democratic Socialist of America, which held a rally on October 8th, cheering and celebrating the murder of Jews in Israel. And my concern is that the DSA could be to American politics what Jeremy Corbyn became to labor politics. And so I'm on a mission, and Democrats should be on a mission to resist the Jeremy Corbynization of American politics. So.
thank you, and also thank you for modeling what it means to be a proud progressive who's pro-Israel, and we don't need to have those binaries or have to choose one. Representative Lawler, you, like Ritchie, have spoken out against anti-Semitism. You're a friend of AJC, supporter of Israel, and generally your party, I think especially your party in Congress, has stood by Israel right now. But there are some trends that we are seeing in the right-wing political world in America that could be worrisome in terms of long-term support and the relationship between America and Israel. One example for this might be the way that some polls show that younger Americans, even younger Americans like evangelical Christians, are moving away from Israel in terms of their views. Or we can talk about the American First movement in the right and the way they advocate for a more isolationist America in terms of its relationship with Israel. So can you help us understand a little bit these trends and whether there is a concern that your party is moving towards that direction?
Ritchie and I have become, I would say, quick friends, in part because we're able to engage in a thoughtful dialogue and discussion. We obviously don't agree on everything. There's obviously, major issues where we have a difference of opinion. But you have to be able to work together collegially and deal with your colleagues, especially as elected officials, to actually address major issues. And I think the fact that Ritchie and I are able to sit here tonight on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and have this discussion speaks volumes, certainly, to our ability to do that. These are serious challenges that we're dealing with around the globe. I serve on foreign affairs. And so far this year, I've traveled to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Jordan, Israel, the UK, Ireland. And when you're dealing with the threats that we are seeing, the threats emanating in the Indo-Pacific from China, the threats from Russia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the terrorist attack by Hamas, backed by Iran, against Israel. We have to look at this in a much more sophisticated way than I think we do at times. Yes, there are people in my party who are taking a more isolationist view. I don't agree with that. And I think the vast majority of Republicans do believe in President Reagan's peace through strength motto. Because the reality is we have to prevent this type of aggression around the world that we are seeing. When people say Israel is an apartheid state, it is not an apartheid state. It is the only multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious democracy in the Middle East. It is a beacon of hope. It is a beacon of hope. It is a beacon of freedom. I do want the Palestinian people to be free from their oppressors, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. When people say there needs to be a ceasefire, there's a very simple way for a ceasefire to occur. Hamas should surrender today. There have been 8 ceasefires over the last 15 years, each time violated by Hamas. They use their own people as human shields. They have oppressed the Palestinian people. Ritchie and I agree on a fundamental point. Israel has a right to exist. And if you start with that premise, that Israel has a right to exist, then we can solve a lot of these challenges. But when Hamas takes the position that Israel does not have a right to exist, that Israel needs to be eliminated, that the Jewish people need to be eradicated, then it's kind of hard to negotiate a ceasefire. And so my perspective and what I have tried to do, both as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and as representative of the 17th Congressional District of New York, which has one of the largest Jewish communities in America in it, is to be a voice in support of Israel, a voice in support of the Jewish people, and a voice of reason. And Ritchie and I have worked very closely together on a number of initiatives, including the Special Envoy for the Abraham Accords, which just passed last week in the NDAA. That is going to become law. That is something that Ritchie came to me with. We worked together starting in February. When I went to Israel in May with Speaker McCarthy for the 75th anniversary of Israel, Ritchie was not on the trip. But Ritchie probably became the most famous person on the trip because I mentioned him in every meeting, and I mentioned the Special Envoy for the Abraham Accords in every meeting, to the point where a number of our colleagues got very angry and jealous. But the point is, I felt it was critically important, if we were going to deal with the challenges in the Middle East, that the Abraham Accords continue to grow and flourish. It is the most consequential foreign policy initiative in decades. And to be able to have a special envoy focused on growing the Abraham Accords was critically important. So we worked tirelessly with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to get this through. We passed it in May. Obviously, it went to the Senate. The Senate, in working with Ben Cardin, they negotiated to put it in the NDAA, and it's going to become law. That is how you actually get stuff done, rather than just screaming at the 92Y when people are trying to engage in an actual dialogue.
Thank you so much for your work on this really special and important legislation. I'd love to hear from either of you how you're thinking about the Abraham Accords right now. So I'd love for you to share a little bit what you've seen that has changed or hasn't changed since October 7th in terms of the Abraham Accords.
You know, for me, October 7th was a crime against humanity, so barbaric that it cannot be ignored. It cannot go unpunished. Hamas must be brought to justice. It must be removed from power. And that, to me, is what peace looks like in the future. So the Abraham Accords, and I'll echo what Mike said, is the greatest breakthrough for peace in the diplomatic history of the United Nations. You know, many of you recall in 1967, the Arab League famously uttered the three words, the three no's, right? No peace with Israel, no negotiations with Israel, no recognition of Israel. And for me, the Abraham Accords represents a paradigm shift from the three no's to the three yeses, right? Yes to peace, yes to negotiations, yes to recognition. There's nothing more powerful than an Arab rejection of BDS, which is the essence of the Abraham Accords. And so I continue to believe that the future of the Middle East is embodied in the Abraham Accords. I'm convinced that Iran and its proxy Hamas carried out the October 7th terror attacks in an attempt to derail Saudi-Israeli peace, which would represent the culmination of the Abraham Accords. It has certainly delayed Israeli-Saudi peace, but it will never derail it. Like, there is no stopping the history's movement in the direction of peace.
So you're not nervous?
I am convinced that the future of the Middle East is neither pro-Israel nor pro-Arab. It's both pro-Israel and pro-Arab. That is the future. The long arc of the Middle East will bend toward Israeli-Arab peace and prosperity. And organizations like the Islamic Republic of Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, these are relics of the past that are going to be relegated to the fringe of geopolitics.
So I think when you look at the terrorist attack of October 7th, it is rooted in two issues. Number one, a view, as I said before, that Israel does not have a right to exist. And number two, as Ritchie alluded to, an attempt to prevent normalization between Israel and other Arab majority countries, and specifically Saudi Arabia. The reason the Abraham Accords are so consequential is because it really does strike at the heart of what peace looks like. It looks like normalized relations between countries, between people of different faiths, and shared prosperity. That's the objective. And we want peace, long-term, lasting peace in the Middle East. We want the Palestinian people to be free, to be able to live side by side with the Israeli people. But the only way you're going to get there is if other Arab majority countries recognize Israel's right to exist. The only way you're going to get there is if Hamas, a terrorist organization in its founding charter, who calls for the eradication of Israel, thank you, the eradication of Israel, is no longer in control of Gaza. When the Palestinian Authority is, to this day, continuing to engage in pay-to-slay policies, where they are paying Palestinians to kill Jews, it makes it very difficult. So when I went to Israel in May and we met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, we asked him, what is your main focus? And he had two goals: to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, as has been the goal for a very long time, but to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. And so, from our perspective and why we really push to get this bill across the finish line, we want someone who is focused exclusively on growing the Abraham Accords, on maintaining the relationships that currently exist and adding new ones. That is how we're going to bring about long-term peace. The same can be said anywhere in the world. If you look at the threats emanating out of the Indo-Pacific with China and the economic coercion that they use against other countries. For the United States, when I went to Japan, Korea, and Taiwan earlier this year, the objective is to really forge stronger economic ties, not just between the United States and those nations, but between them, getting Japan and South Korea to have stronger ties. And all of this is critically important if we're going to maintain peace, but also maintain our role as leader of the free world. And I think that's why this work is so important and why we both will continue to focus on it.
Thank you. So you mentioned right now, both of you address how we can make the region better. I want to talk about some broad regional threats. We talk about Iran, we talk about the Houthis, am I saying it right? Hezbollah, the threat that they are presenting right now, not just to Israel, but to a US-led international order. What should US leadership do in order to address these threats?
So, as I was saying before, I think we are at a point where China, Russia, and Iran have entered into this unholy alliance that seeks to undermine and destabilize the United States, Israel, our allies, and the free world. And the things they are doing is not, that they're not in silos. Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror. They fund Hamas, 93% of their budget. They fund Hezbollah. They fund other terrorist organizations across the region. for the express purpose of attacking Israel, of undermining the United States. The biggest source of funding for them is the sale of Iranian petroleum. The biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum is China. So I introduced the SHIP Act earlier this year, and the SHIP Act would implement secondary sanctions on purchasers of Iranian petroleum. It would implement secondary sanctions on those that refine Iranian petroleum, those that transport Iranian petroleum. It passed the House in the aftermath of October 7th. Because if we are going to combat this, we not only have to forge a path towards peace, but we have to economically go after those that are not our friends. They're not our allies. They are our enemies. Iran is an enemy, and we have to recognize that. And if China is going to continue to engage with Iran in the way that they have, and purchase Iranian petroleum, which funds the terrorism, then they need to be held accountable for that. So we have to look at peace. We have to look at deterrence. You see what is happening right now? You see what is happening right now, in the waters around the Middle East, and what the Houthis are doing. And they are obviously doing it at Iran's beck and call. And so there has to be more force by the United States, both in terms of what we are doing economically to deter this, but what we have to do militarily to crack down on what is happening right now.
Yeah. Should I wait 5 seconds just in case a protester wants to? Okay. Well, first, I am enormously grateful for the leadership of President Biden, who has been unequivocal. President Biden is the first American president to travel to Israel in a time of war. He has sent not only one, but 2 carriers to the Eastern Mediterranean, which has been effective at preventing the conflict from metastasizing into a multi-front war that could include Hezbollah and Iran. And so I'm enormously grateful for the leadership of President Biden. Now, the AstroTurf agitators we had here earlier, I'm sure they believe that Israel is the root of all evil in the Middle East. In the world. There is a root of all evil in the Middle East, but it's not Israel, it's the Islamic Republic of Iran. Because wherever you have a failed state, whether it's Yemen, or Iraq, or Syria, or Lebanon, or a place like Gaza, wherever you have a failed state, you have the tentacles of Iran. Iran is the singular driver of death and destruction and destabilization in the Middle East. And October 7th should be a wake-up call about the nature of the Iranian threat. There was, for a long time, optimism that if we integrate the Iranian regime with the international community, then maybe over time it will moderate. As China became more integrated with the West, it became more emboldened in its authoritarianism, not less. As Russia became more integrated with the West, it became more emboldened in its authoritarianism, not less. Why do we assume that Iran is going to be an exception to the rule? Right? The lesson of recent history is that enriching your enemies does not make them your friends. It simply makes them more powerful enemies. And there would be no greater breakthrough for peace than the collapse of the present regime in Iran. And what's tragic about Iran is that it actually has a vibrant civil society. There would be no greater friendship in the Middle East than the friendship between a democratic Iran and a democratic Israel. And that is the future that we should be hoping for.
Yeah. And supporting all those brave Iranians who actually want freedom.
Notice none of these activists would ever disrupt members of Congress, for the brave feminists and women
Right.
who risk their lives to confront the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world.
Right.
Right? These people are selective in their concerns for human rights.
Both of you mentioned in your comments concern for Palestinian liberation and freedom. There's a lot of discussion right now about the day after. And there is considerable pressure for Israel to present its own vision for what the day after could look like. I wonder if either of you wants to share some perspective on what you can see coming, or at least hope for in a realistic manner, for the future of Israelis and Palestinians.
So obviously, right now, Israel is engaged in prosecuting this war, and hopefully soon they will be able to complete it in terms of eliminating the threat posed by Hamas. Long term, I think we have to look, obviously, at an Arab-led coalition that will help with the support of the United States, with the support of our allies, and in cooperation with the Israeli government, but an Arab-led effort within Gaza and ultimately in the West Bank, because I personally don't see how the Palestinian Authority long-term can operate the way that it has. But you're going to need an Arab-led effort to help reestablish a functioning government and help rebuild and invest in, the economic component of rebuilding in Gaza. Obviously, the United States should support that long term, but for it to work, I think it has to be Arab-led. I don't think it can be something that the United States says this is what it's going to be, or that Israel says this is what it's going to be. I think it has to come with the support of the Saudis and others in the region who will be able to, financially support it. But that goes to the point about why the Abraham Accords is important, because if you have that normalized relationship with Israel, there's more trust. There's more trust, and then you can get to a place where we can rebuild a country that can, have an economic path forward. But there has to be an understanding, and again, to me, it goes to a fundamental point. The Palestinian people will have to accept Israel's right to exist. And that is going to be critical in all of this. And so if there's that acceptance, if there's that understanding, then there can be a really bright future in the Middle East.
No, I'm actually optimistic. Because I think once we remove Hamas from power, and if we manage to replace it with a regime that makes peace with Israel, then
It's a big if.
It's big. I would just say the situation in the West Bank is challenging, but it is fundamentally better than what you have in Gaza, right? In Gaza, you had relentless rocket fire, endless warfare from the moment Hamas assumed power. And so if we have an imperfect regime that is willing to make peace, that would be a game changer, right? That would fundamentally change the security situation near the Gaza border. And imagine, if all the billions of dollars that have been flowing into Gaza, imagine if those dollars were not spent on terror tunnels, but were actually spent on schools and hospitals and economic development that engages and employs people. And I do believe that there is a correlation between unemployment and extremism, right? When you have a place like Gaza that is so catastrophically misgoverned, that is where it has high rates of unemployment, that's run by a terrorist organization, it's going to be a breeding ground for terrorism. And so if it were properly governed, if there were actually investment in the people of Gaza, then that would provide them with a fighting chance at a decent life. And I do feel, if you think about all the issues in the Israeli-Palestinian process, the easiest is Gaza. Like there are land disputes relating to the West Bank. There are no land disputes relating to Gaza. Like Israel wants nothing from Gaza. All it wants is a regime that recognizes Israel's right to exist and that's willing to make peace.
Yeah, I would say that part of the challenge or the question that many of us are thinking about is that it's not only a matter of the regime or the governing body. We've seen polls recently come out from both Gaza and the West Bank in which there's broad socially widespread rejectionism and support for Hamas's violence against Israel.
So I'm not as alarmed as others, but my view might be in the minority. I would say first I think we have to stop subsidizing anti-Semitic indoctrination in the form of UNRWA. So that's right. But I would say, there's a difference between a cold peace and a warm peace. I agree that the de-radicalization of Palestinians in Gaza is a necessary condition for a warm peace in the long run. But it's not necessarily a necessary condition for a cold peace. When Israel made peace with Egypt in the late 1970s, it's not as if Egyptian civil society became magically pro-Israel, right? There is deep anti-Semitism in the Arab world. But Israel has shown that it is capable of forging peace at the level of governments, at the level of regimes, even if there is deeply rooted anti-Semitism in Arab societies itself. And so I do believe Israel could achieve a short-term cold peace in Gaza with the right regime in place. But the process of de-radicalizing Palestinians, that's a longer-term process. That's going to be more challenging. There's no question about it.
Yeah. And I think it's important to have the optimism and the hope because it is a very long road ahead, but we have to keep moving.
I also think you have to be pragmatic, and we cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah. So let me continue with some of these questions. You mentioned earlier, Representative Lawler, you mentioned China. And I want to just make a little bridge between China and the US, especially just to hear your thoughts about TikTok. Right now, sorry, had to ask. No, because, I mean...
we were just well represented by the TikTok generation, so I will say...
I was going to say that was a good setup. No, but I think it's clear to many observers that part of what we're seeing in terms of younger generation of Americans, the recent Harvard-Harris poll that came last week showed a majority of Gen Z who supported Hamas's violence against Israel, for example, and other views that look at Jews in America as oppressors, not only when it comes to Israel, but also when it comes to the US. And there's been a lot of different theses about what is the source of these views. And one of them is just to think about the fact that the main source of media and news right now for Gen Z is TikTok. So I would just love to hear a little bit about what is possible to do for those of us who are concerned about this kind of effect.
So there's no question, prior to October 7th, we have seen a rapid rise in anti-Semitism across the United States and around the globe. And when you look at the fact that in New York, for instance, 98% of anti-Semitic hate crimes are not prosecuted. The Jewish population is a little over 2% nationwide, and yet they make up over 60% of the hate crimes nationwide. There is a real challenge in this country. And I think social media, while it has a lot of positives and certainly allows for a lot more engagement from the general public in our body politic, I think it is also probably one of the most destructive things that we have seen. And specifically TikTok. I am of the mindset that TikTok should be banned in the United States. I think it is a vehicle by which the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government are able to manipulate our young people, collect a lot of information and data, and undermine the pinnings of our democracy here. In the aftermath of October 7th, Osama bin Laden's letter to America went viral on TikTok. Now, most of these young kids that are on TikTok weren't even born on September 11th. But they magically started circulating this letter. And I think people need to ask themselves why that was being done and how that quickly went viral and what the purpose of that is. And again, when you see the relationships that are going on between China, between Iran, that raises serious questions in my mind. And I don't think when you look at something like TikTok, great. We have plenty of smart people who can create a very similar app that can do very similar things and be owned and operated here in the United States. I fundamentally believe that we need to be smarter about what we are doing. Our enemies are, in some respects, running circles around us. And they look at what goes on in our country, and they see, frankly, some of the stupid shit we focus on, as opposed to the serious substantive issues. And what is the focus of the media? What is the focus of each political party? The stuff that everybody, is railing about, as opposed to how do we actually deal with the major threats facing the United States? How do we deal with the crisis at our border? How do we deal with the fact that we're about 6 million units of housing underbuilt in this country? How do we deal with energy costs and grocery bills continuing to skyrocket even as inflation comes down? How do we deal with the real public safety challenges that we see in major cities across this country? It shouldn't just be a political weapon to use in each election cycle. It should actually be, how do we solve it? And that's not what we're talking about. That's not what our focus is. And certainly, what goes on social media is not about that. And I think when you see this growth in anti-Semitism, a lot of it starts with, yes, social media, but also education. And our education system needs a complete overhaul. I'll wrap up so that Ritchie can talk, but I introduced 2 bills this year on this very issue. After the CUNY Law School graduation speech in May that went viral, I introduced the Stop Anti-Semitism on College Campuses Act, which would defund any institution of higher learning of every federal dollar, including student aid, if they promote or sanction anti-Semitic events on their campuses. Now, the second bill, and I think in some respects much more important, is the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which would require the Department of Education to adopt the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism and its contemporary examples for all of its discrimination enforcement cases. When you see the 3 university presidents testify before Congress, they didn't get asked a trick question. This was not a tough gotcha question. This was probably the most straightforward question anyone could have been asked. Is calling for the genocide of Jews a violation of your code of conduct? The fact that all 3 of them couldn't just say yes, but had to say, well, it depends on the context, and you need some action affiliated with it. What action would you like to see? Do you actually want to see a Jew killed on your campus? But I'll tell you why this is a problem. We have seen on these college campuses, a big push. We needed safe spaces If somebody said something that upset us, we needed a safe space. So the last 4 years, we needed a safe space. But if you call for the genocide of Jews, not so much. I just find it mind-numbingly stupid that we can't use a little common sense here. And to me, it requires us to establish what is the definition of anti-Semitism and make sure that it is being enforced. And the best way to do that is to adopt the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism and its contemporary examples, so that people fully understand that if you do A, B, and C, yes, that is anti-Semitic, and you will be held accountable for it.
Bring that you brought us to our favorite subject, campus. I'll turn it to you. And I'll say there is, I think, a discussion going on trying to figure out how to address some of these issues. And I've seen two primary responses. I've seen some people who want to extend the safe kind of like culture on campus to Jews as well, and to actually say, well, if we have DEI officers, and if we're really talking about these issues, then we have to also see Jews as victims in terms of their history and things like that. And then there is another position that says, actually, the problem at those congressional hearings was that of hypocrisy and of double standards, and we should have one standard, and we should have more free speech, and we should not give more power to DEI officers to kind of deal with this problem. So have you thought a little bit about which one of those two approaches or a different approach you would advocate for when it comes to campus and anti-Semitism?
I feel like this is a debate happening among academics, not among. When people ask me, why are you so pro-Israel, I say because I dropped out of college. So.
Okay. Wait, can you unpack that for us?
No, So Mike reminded us of the congressional hearing, right? If you asked the average person in the Bronx, does calling for a genocide of Jews constitute harassment? The average Bronxite would tell you, of course. Common sense dictates that. If you ask an academic will tell you, well, it's context dependent. It reminds me of a quote from George Orwell, who said there are some ideas that are so stupid only intellectuals can believe them. And it just feels like there is something endemic to the higher education industrial complex that causes people to lose their ability to think critically and their moral common sense. Like the loss of moral common sense has become not a bug, but a feature of academic life in America. Now, I'm not advocating that you have your children shut down their TikTok accounts and drop out of college, but I'm kidding. But for me, the response to October 7th, to see fellow Americans cheering and celebrating the murder of Jews in Israel, like that is not only a Jewish crisis or an Israeli crisis, that is a crisis that strikes at the very core of the American soul. Like there's a deep rot of anti-Semitism in academia and social media that has to be confronted. Because if we as a society cannot condemn the butchering of babies with moral clarity, then what are we becoming as a society? And what does that reveal about the depth of anti-Semitism in the American soul? And on the issue of TikTok, TikTok is not only a social media platform, it is the leading news source for the next generation of Americans. And the fact that we have put the leading news source that shapes the most impressionable minds in our society in the hands of our leading foreign adversary, the Chinese Communist Party. Like historians are going to remember that as a colossal strategic miscalculation, as an act of national self-sabotage. And so I feel strongly that we need to pass legislation that either effectuates a ban or force sale of TikTok to an American company or a company based in an allied country, or else we're allowing our enemies to weaponize our own college campuses and our own social media platforms against us. Like I remember when I was, as a New Yorker, living through 9/11, I will never forget the sense of national togetherness that we all felt as Americans. I felt like that's unthinkable today. That if we had a repeat of 9/11, there would be young college students cheering acts of terrorism against their own country. Like, I think, October 7th has been an awakening for the Jewish community, but it needs to be a reckoning for the United States of America.
Do you want to comment on the question that I had before about free speech versus restrictionism?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'll be brief. Obviously, there's always a fine line between free speech and getting into censorship, and we want a robust debate of ideas. We want to have a robust discussion. I think one of the biggest problems in our country today is the moment somebody says something that you disagree with, you immediately ascribe an adjective to them. Could be a really bad adjective or not, but we immediately try to put people into a category or a box based on what they say or what they may believe on a certain issue. And I think that these colleges have frankly become breeding grounds for groupthink. They are not engaged in robust debate. If you say something that, generally speaking, the academia elite don't like, they do try to shut it down. The number of people who have gone to college campuses to speak and been kicked out or prevented from coming and speaking at a campus because of their political view on something. That is destructive, and I think we have to find the balance here. But I think we also need to use common sense. And if somebody is calling for a massacre of Jews or blacks or gays or anyone, they should be held accountable. There should be consequence to that. Part of the problem in our society today is there's no consequence for anything. You could do whatever you want, say whatever you want, and there's no consequence to it. So I think there is a fine line certainly on free speech, and we want to encourage debate and discussion. But we also know the difference between voicing an opinion on a decision of the government of Israel and calling for the genocide of Jews. It's pretty clear.
Can I ask, I don't know if I can add something to the free speech part, but I don't want to. But I also find, the concern, well, we all love free speech, but the concern for free speech tends to be selective and situational. And no one is truly a free speech absolutist, but I find, so take the CUNY School of Law, right? You had a student who called for the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state, who was selected as a commencement speaker. Right, a year before she was selected, she went on the streets in a rally entitled "Globalize the Intifada" and called for Jews to be Zionists to be purged from college campuses and college classrooms. Right, she previously had said all Zionists should be burned in the hottest pit of hell. Right, and she called for the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state, and people said she had a right to speak because it's free speech. And so I would simply ask CUNY School of Law a simple question. If she had called for the destruction of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, or the destruction of Haiti and Jamaica, does anyone here think that CUNY School of Law would have allowed her to speak at a commencement? So why the double standard when it comes to the Jewish community? Why the double standard when it comes to the Jewish state? She's entitled to say whatever she wants, but she's not entitled to the platform of a commencement, a graduation speech. And her speech is not entitled to the imprimatur, to the stamp of approval of a public university. And so I feel like we have a distorted notion of free speech. And, the First Amendment applies to us as government officials. We should be limited in our ability to restrict expression. But private universities can have a code of conduct that is much more stringent and that expresses their moral values against genocide. So I just find that people invoke free speech as a pretext for defending the indefensible.
Yeah, when I speak with Jewish or pro-Israel students on campus right now, effectively what they express is that many of them feel there's two free speech regimes, one for everybody else and one for them. And I think that's a concern that many people have, that there is hypocrisy and a clear double standards, exactly like you were saying before. I want to ask you one final question, and with this we can fold our remarks in here. We can end the remarks. My late teacher, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he would make a distinction between optimism and hope. I know you used optimism before, but he preferred the word hope. Tikva, hope, yes. Yes, thank you.
I am Jewish, I will say.
But that distinction is important because I think optimism is, for some people, it might be like a Pollyannish belief that things will get better. And hope is determination, is a commitment and a resolution to work together. I would say here to work across the aisle and to make sure that we do everything in our capacity to build a better future and to make things better. So I would like to ask you if you had any thoughts as to what, you spoke a lot about what you are doing, and we're so grateful to you from the halls of Congress in terms of what you're doing, not only to support Israel, but also just to fight for a better America. What can us citizens sitting here right now, right? We're thinking about all of these big issues. We're thinking about the antisemitism, TikTok, the height of polarization in our country, all of these really big problems. What can we do as citizens who really want to have hope and want to have determination and commitment to make things better?
So you're more hopeful than I am.
So on Wednesday, I went and spoke at 6 a.m. At my church. About 30 years ago, my dad had started a men's group that would meet every Wednesday at 6 a.m. He passed away 10 years ago from cancer and multiple sclerosis. And so the guys that were part of this group named a breakfast after him. And so they asked me to come speak at it, and which was really very touching. But I talked about my dad, and I talked about the role that faith has played in my career in politics. When he died, the very last conversation that he and I had, he said to me, "To whom much is given, much is required. And you have been given a lot of talents and skills, and use them to do God's work and keep your moral compass." And he said, whatever you do in life, love your neighbor as yourself. Those were the last words that my dad ever spoke to me. And so I cherish that, and I carry that with me in the work that I do. I don't always do it perfectly, but I carry that with me. And I think all of us, whether you're in elected office, whether you're a concerned citizen, whether you're engaged in business or the law or academia or whatever you may do, we all have skills and talents that we have been blessed with. And we all have a moral obligation to use those for good. And I think one of the things that I've really looked at, especially in light of what happened on October 7th and what happened on September 11th, as Ritchie alluded to, I was a freshman in high school. I was in my 5th day of freshman year. And you see the unity of the Jewish people in the aftermath of that. We saw in America, and certainly in New York, the unity after September 11th. In our darkest moments, in our deepest despair, there is hope. We all want hope. Who wants to be angry? Who wants to walk around being so angry that you just yell and scream at people who you disagree with?
Some people do.
Some. But in truth, who wants to be that miserable? Serve a purpose greater than your own self-interest. Serve a cause greater than your own self-interest. All of us have that opportunity. We have a bigger platform being members of Congress, but all of us in our own ways have that opportunity. And I think even out of darkness, there is light, there is hope. And I think so many of the challenges that we are dealing with in this country and around the globe, if we would find a way to actually go sit down and talk with those, even those we disagree with, and find a path forward, the truth is you will find more commonality and more agreement than you ever thought. And as I say to my constituents all the time, whether you are a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're an independent, it doesn't matter. All of us want a few basic things in life. We want a good paying job to provide for our families. We want a quality education for our children. We want access to housing and health care. And we want to live in safe neighborhoods. Every single person in this room wants that. So the question to me is, what are we doing to address those issues? What are we doing to help people get there? And when you look at the threats around the world, how do we bring people together? How do we? You talked about the Palestinian people and the polling that's showing. And to Ritchie's point, poverty, and unemployment and homelessness, and these create challenges for people. How do we bring them along? How do we get them to where there is peace, there is shared prosperity? So yes, a lot of challenges ahead. Yes, frustration, anger, hurt, but always hope. And I think that is something all of us have a responsibility towards, and all of us have an obligation to do God's work.
I'm not going to sing Tikva, but not quite. My Yiddish is better than my Hebrew, I would say. For me, hope is the greatest gift that God has given us. Life is not reducible to a rational system. Life requires a leap of faith. And if there were ever a people who embody hope, it's the story of the Jewish people. Right? The Jewish people have survived millennia of exile and expulsions and crusades and inquisitions and genocide and ethnic cleansing and pogroms to emerge more resilient, more unified than ever before. Right? Israel's the only ancient civilization to be reborn. Hebrew is an ancient language to be reborn. And so I think if there were ever a greater cause for hope, it is to be found in the resilience and resourcefulness of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And when I was in Israel, someone shared with me what might be an apocryphal story about Napoleon passing by a synagogue during the Jewish Day of Mourning. And when he heard the Jewish congregants grieving, he asked, why the grief? Why the mourning? And it was explained to him that it was a Jewish day of mourning and that the Jews have been yearning for a return to their homeland, praying for a return to their homeland for thousands of years. And he was so struck by the longevity of the Jewish tradition that he essentially said, a people who are so passionately devoted to pray for thousands of years are destined to reclaim their homeland. And what I love about that story is that it captures what I see as the secret to the success of the Jewish community and the pro-Israel community. It's that passionate devotion, that passionate commitment, that hope. My understanding is that the phrase, "Am Israel High," actually was first heard in BBC radio when Jews who were newly liberated from a concentration camp began singing Haktikva and then spontaneously concluded with Am Israel Hai. If that's not an embodiment of hope, then I'm not sure what would be. A few weeks ago, I had the honor of speaking at the March for Israel. And it was an overwhelming experience for me, and I was reminded that 2023 is historic, not only because it's the 75th anniversary of Israel's rebirth, but it's also the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech. And the Jewish people have long had a hope, a dream of Jewish emancipation through a Jewish state. And there's no doubt in my mind that dream will live on for the next 75 years and beyond. So there's reason for hope. Am Israel Hai.
Just thank you so much for your answers. Thank you for giving us hope. Thank you for also modeling moral courage. Courage is contagious, so let's all learn from this and keep it going on. And soon we're going to...
Any more protests?
Oh.
A round of applause again for this My name is Rob Skolnick. I'm the president of AJC New York. Representatives Lawler and Torres, we are deeply grateful for your steadfast support of AJC, of Israel, and the Jewish people. Your courage, I didn't realize it was going to take so much courage just to be here, but your courage for standing up for truth and what is right is really a true inspiration for all of us. Thank you. At the American Jewish Committee, as the global advocacy organization of the Jewish people, we work tirelessly for support of Israel and the Jewish people. Through our work with elected officials, diplomats, foreign leaders, college campuses, interfaith partners, we're at the forefront of creating a better world amidst the darkness, particularly since October 7th. Please feel free to speak with me, with other AJC board members or staffers who are here. We have literature around. We would love your help and support so that we can continue the work we so desperately need to continue. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you again.